They thought they could corner him with accusations. Instead, he ripped off his mic and walked. Here's what happened. The studio lights burned bright, bouncing off the sleek black floor. Cameras stood poised like silent observers, their lenses waiting to capture every flicker of expression. Across from each other, separated only by a glass table, Elon Musk and Greg Talbot sat, both seemingly at ease. But the air between them carried something unspoken. Greg, a veteran TV host known for his sharp questioning and left-leaning stance, had done this dance 1,000 times before. His gray suit was crisp, his hands folded neatly on the desk, and his smile was just wide enough to suggest warmth without sincerity. Elon, in contrast, leaned back slightly in his chair, one ankle resting on his knee, his expression unreadable. He had done interviews before, hundreds of them, but this one felt different. His gut told him that Greg wasn't just here to ask about Tesla, SpaceX, or his latest acquisition. There was something else lurking beneath the polite formalities. The show's theme music faded, replaced by the steady voice of an off-screen announcer. Tonight, billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk sits down with Greg Talbot in an exclusive conversation. No topic is off limits. Stay tuned for a discussion you won't forget. The red recording light blinked to life. Greg adjusted his tie and turned toward the camera. Welcome back to the Talbot Report. Tonight, we have a guest who hardly needs an introduction. He's redefined the auto industry, launched rockets into space, and is currently at the center of more controversies than we can count. Elon Musk, thanks for being here. Elon gave a small nod. Thanks for having me. His voice was even, his posture relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, scanning Greg like he was analyzing an equation, looking for the variables that didn't add up. Greg wasted no time. Let's start with something light, a rehearsed chuckle. Twitter, or should I say, X. A lot of people believe the platform has changed dramatically under your leadership. Some say for the better, others, not so much. Elon smirked slightly. Depends who you ask. If you ask people who value free speech, they'll say it's improved. If you ask people who liked censorship, they'll say it's worse. Greg raised an eyebrow. Censorship, that's a strong word. It's the right word, Elon countered. Greg let the moment hang before shifting in his seat. Well, all right, but surely you'd agree that free speech doesn't mean allowing hate to spread unchecked. Elon exhaled through his nose, already seeing where this was going. What you call hate speech, someone else might call a strong opinion. The point is, who gets to decide? A bunch of unelected fact-checkers? Greg smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. So, no regrets on how you've handled things? Not really, Elon said casually. Mistakes? Sure. But regret? No. Twitter was dying when I bought it. Now people actually use it. Greg nodded slowly. Interesting, but let's move on. The conversation flowed, touching on Tesla's latest innovations, Neuralink's ambitions, and even Musk's stance on AI regulation. But something about Greg's tone had shifted. The questions felt calculated. Not unusual for an interview like this, but there was an edge creeping in, something just beneath the surface. Then came a change in Greg's demeanor. Small, almost imperceptible, but enough for Musk to notice. The host leaned forward slightly, lacing his fingers together. His next words carried a different weight. You've built an empire, Elon. No doubt about that. But with great power comes great scrutiny. Elon blinked, unimpressed. That's usually how it works. Greg tilted his head. Then let's address some of that scrutiny, shall we? But Musk had a feeling that this was where the real interview was about to begin. Greg maintained his polished smile, but his eyes had sharpened. The warm pleasantries were over. He tapped a few notes on his tablet before looking up. Elon, you've always had a reputation for pushing boundaries. People admire that, but some say you push them a little too far. Elon didn't flinch. Progress requires risk. Greg nodded as if he agreed. Of course, but let's talk about accountability. He turned to the camera for effect. Your leadership style has been described as brilliant but reckless. Employees from Tesla and SpaceX have spoken about unrealistic deadlines, brutal work hours, and a culture of fear. He returned his gaze to Musk. Are they lying? Elon let out a quiet breath. I expect high performance. This isn't a coffee shop. We're building rockets and AI, not flipping burgers. I don't force anyone to work for me. They choose to because they believe in what we're doing. Greg's eyebrows lifted slightly. That's a fair point, But what about the reports of people being fired over minor disagreements? Engineers who say they questioned your decisions and were shown the door the next day? Elon shrugged. If someone isn't aligned with the mission, they shouldn't be there. No one's entitled to a job just because they've been around a while. Greg pursed his lips as if weighing his next move. Then he leaned forward. All right, let's talk about your stance on AI. Elon's expression barely shifted, but the shift in topic didn't go unnoticed. You've repeatedly warned about the dangers of artificial intelligence. You've even called it an existential threat. And yet, you're actively developing AI through XAI, Neuralink, and Tesla's self-driving technology. Isn't that a bit contradictory? Elon gave a half smile. If you're afraid of a flood, do you just hope it never rains? Or do you start building better dams? Greg let the analogy settle before pressing on. So you believe that controlling AI is the only way to protect humanity from it? I believe that if the wrong people control it, we're in trouble. Greg's lips twitched slightly, as if he had been waiting for that answer. The wrong people. Who are they? Elon's gaze was steady. Governments that prioritize control over innovation. Tech companies that put profit above ethics. Media outlets that manipulate narratives instead of informing the public. Greg chuckled, shaking his head. So, everyone but you? Elon's expression didn't change, but his fingers drummed lightly against the armrest. Greg's smile grew. See, that's what people find interesting about you. You position yourself as this renegade, this anti-establishment genius who's here to save the world from bad actors. But at the same time, you're one of the most powerful people on the planet. Some would say that makes you the very thing you claim to fight against. Elon exhaled through his nose. Power isn't the problem. It's who wields it and for what purpose. Greg nodded, appearing to accept the response. But then his smile faded. The next question came slower, more deliberate. Let's talk about your connections. A flicker of something passed through Musk's expression. Greg continued. You've been seen at private events with world leaders, controversial billionaires, and government officials from multiple countries. Some of them not exactly known for their human rights records, and yet you speak about free speech and transparency. He tilted his head. Why should people trust that you're not playing both sides? Elon leaned forward slightly. His voice remained calm, but the sharpness was there. Meeting someone doesn't mean agreeing with them. I'll talk to anyone if it leads to progress. Greg pressed on. Sure, but there's a difference between talking and working together. Documents have surfaced linking you to private deals with certain governments. Elon's face remained still, but something in the air shifted. Greg let the silence hang for a beat too long before delivering the next line. Some say you're not the rebel you pretend to be, that you're just another billionaire protecting his own interests. Elon inhaled through his nose, his fingers tightening around the armrest, but Greg wasn't done yet. Elon's expression didn't change, but the subtle movements gave him away. The slight tensing of his jaw, the fingers curling just a bit tighter against the armrest. He had been in tough interviews before, but this was different. Greg wasn't just challenging him, he was setting a trap. Greg saw it too. He leaned in just slightly, his voice dropping in volume, forcing the room into a sharper silence. Elon, you've built a reputation on transparency, on speaking your mind, on being, he lifted his fingers into air quotes, the last honest billionaire. But what if I told you that some of your honesty has been carefully curated? Elon's eyebrow twitched. Sounds like you've got a point to make, so make it. Greg took his time. He tapped on his tablet as if reading from a source, but his eyes never left Elon's. Recently, there have been whispers, documents surfacing, people talking off the record. They claim that while you publicly condemn government overreach, behind closed doors, you've made quiet deals to gain special treatment for your companies. Favorable contracts, tax breaks, access to technologies that most companies could never dream of getting. He let the accusation sink in. Elon exhaled, slow and controlled. You think Tesla, SpaceX, and my other companies grew without competition? Without scrutiny? We've had to fight for every inch of progress. If there were backroom deals, I must have missed the memo. Greg nodded as if he expected that response. All right, then let's be specific. Let's talk about China. The air in the studio thickened. Greg continued, his tone surgical. Tesla is the only foreign-owned automaker allowed to operate in China without a domestic partner. That's not just luck. That's an exception the Chinese government made for you. In exchange, Tesla's gigafactory in Shanghai has helped China advance its own electric vehicle industry, an industry now competing directly with American car companies. That sounds an awful lot like a deal. Elon's eyes darkened, his lips pressing into a firm line. We build cars there. That's it. No special favors, no hidden agreements. Every major company that wants to sell in China has to manufacture there. Why should Tesla be different? Greg didn't break eye contact. Because unlike the others, you didn't have to give up a stake of your company. And now there are reports that the same Chinese firms Tesla helped build are undercutting American automakers in pricing and supply chains. Some even suggest you helped accelerate China's dominance in EVs at America's expense. Elon let out a short breath, somewhere between amusement and irritation. Are you suggesting I committed treason? Greg didn't answer immediately. That hesitation, that moment of silence, was enough. Elon leaned forward now, his voice carrying a sharper edge. I build things. That's what I do. While politicians argue about trade wars, I'm solving problems. If people want to twist that into something sinister, that's on them. Greg took a beat before responding. People just want to know where your loyalty lies. Elon scoffed, shaking his head slightly. My loyalty? My loyalty is to humanity's future, not to a single government, not to a political party, and certainly not to the media narrative of the week. Greg let out a slow breath, feigning contemplation. Fair enough, but let's go deeper. He glanced at his tablet. There have been talks, serious accusations, actually, suggesting that certain governments, including China and the US, have leveraged you for something bigger than cars, that you've provided access to Starlink technology in ways that benefit one side over another, that your satellites aren't just connecting the world, but controlling what parts of it stay connected. A heavy silence filled the room. Elon's expression hardened. I'm not going to entertain conspiracy theories. Greg tilted his head. Is it a conspiracy if there's evidence? Elon let out a small, humorless laugh. If you had real evidence, you wouldn't be calling it talks and suggestions. You'd be showing it. Greg smirked slightly, sensing Musk's patience thinning. So you're saying there's nothing to hide? Elon's voice was sharper now. I'm saying this conversation has shifted from journalism to theater. Greg didn't miss a beat. Maybe, but if the story's compelling enough, people believe it. Elon leaned back, exhaling through his nose. His expression had shifted from amusement to something else, something closer to frustration. But Greg wasn't done pushing. Not yet. Greg let the tension settle like a slow-rolling fog. He had Musk exactly where he wanted him. Cornered, irritated, forced to defend himself against accusations that had no clear answers. But he wasn't done. Not yet. He adjusted his tie, the smallest of smirks tugging at the edge of his mouth. Let's talk about something even more serious. Elon didn't react, but there was something different in his stillness, though. Greg tapped his tablet again. There are reports, verified sources, suggesting that Starlink has been used in military operations, not just for humanitarian aid or disaster relief, but for warfare. That access to your technology has been selectively granted or denied, depending on political interests. Elon's jaw tightened, his fingers tapping once against the glass table. I don't control how Starlink is used. It's a tool, like the internet. Like Jeeps, people use it how they see fit. That's not my call. Greg didn't blink. But you have made calls, haven't you? There have been instances where Starlink was shut off in conflict zones, and it just so happened to benefit one side over another. Elon inhaled sharply, his patience visibly thinning. If I let it be used in unrestricted warfare, I'd be accused of fueling global conflict. If I regulate access, I'm accused of picking sides. So which is it? Greg didn't answer. Instead, he let the silence drag. He wasn't looking for an answer. He was looking for a reaction. The control in Elon's voice began to slip, just slightly. You're framing this like some grand conspiracy, but the truth is simple. We provide internet, nothing more. Greg leaned back, crossing his arms. Then why is it that multiple defense officials, both here and abroad, claim that you personally intervened in certain cases? That you've been acting as a gatekeeper for global communications? Elon let out a short laugh, but it wasn't amusement, it was disbelief. Let me get this straight. You're saying I control governments now? Greg's expression stayed neutral. I'm saying you have influence, and people want to know where that influence stops. Elon's patience had officially run out. This is ridiculous. His voice was sharper now, clipped at the edges. You bring me here under the pretense of a fair conversation, and instead you're just throwing out wild accusations, hoping something sticks. Greg held up his hands. I'm just asking questions. Elon shook his head, chuckling under his breath. No, you're performing, and frankly, it's pathetic. Greg pressed forward, ignoring the insult. Elon, if you have nothing to hide, why are you so defensive? And that was it. That was the final straw. Elon's expression hardened, his jaw clenched as he reached for the mic clipped to his jacket. With one swift motion, he pulled it off and tossed it onto the table. The small thud echoed louder than it should have in the dead silence of the studio. Because this isn't an interview, he said, his voice low but charged. It's a setup. Greg opened his mouth to respond, but Elon was already standing. He smoothed down his blazer, casting one last look at the host before turning on his heel. The camera crew didn't know what to do. A producer whispered frantically into a headset. A stagehand took a hesitant step forward, as if to stop him, but thought better of it. Elon was already walking off set. Greg turned back to the camera, his face carefully controlled, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Well, he said, exhaling dramatically, that was unexpected. The red recording light was still on. The audience watching at home had just witnessed something that would dominate headlines for weeks, but the real storm was only beginning. The moment Elon walked off set, chaos erupted. Producers scrambled behind the scenes, whispering into headsets, trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let the cameras roll. The studio crew, usually invisible, stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch history unfold. Greg Talbot, however, didn't miss a beat. With practiced ease, he turned back to the camera, smoothing his tie as if nothing out of the ordinary had just happened. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems Mr. Musk has left the conversation. But let's be honest, walking away from tough questions doesn't make them go away. His voice was measured, deliberate. He knew exactly what he was doing. The production team seized the moment, switching to a split-screen replay of Musk unclipping his mic, standing up, and storming off. They slowed it down, zoomed in on his expression. Every frame analyzed, every flicker of frustration captured. Within minutes, the footage was online. First came the headlines. Elon Musk storms off live TV after explosive confrontation. Musk loses his cool when pressed about secret government deals. Is this the moment Musk's empire begins to crack? Then came the reaction. Social media caught fire. Twitter, or X, as Musk insisted it be called, erupted into a battleground. His supporters rallied behind him, calling the interview a setup, an ambush, an example of everything wrong with mainstream media. Greg Talbot is a snake. That wasn't an interview. It was an attack. Musk didn't storm off. He refused to play their game. Big difference. Funny how they frame it as losing control when someone refuses to sit through a smear job. But the other side was just as loud. Musk ran because he got caught. If you have nothing to hide, you don't walk out. This is what happens when billionaires think they're above accountability. He's not a genius. He's a businessman protecting his own interests, just like the rest of them. It didn't take long for late-night talk shows to jump on the moment. Clips of Musk's exit played on loop, each host putting their own spin on it. Some mocked him, some praised him, but one thing was clear. Nobody was ignoring it. Even mainstream news anchors, usually careful with their words, couldn't resist the spectacle. This is a defining moment for Elon Musk, one commentator said. For years, he's positioned himself as a fearless innovator, unafraid of tough conversations. But tonight, when faced with real accountability, he walked away. Others pushed back. Let's be honest, Greg Talbot knew exactly what he was doing. That wasn't journalism. That was a setup. Musk didn't run. He refused to entertain bad faith arguments. Meanwhile, Musk himself remained silent. No tweets, no statements, no damage control. For a man who usually had something to say about everything, the silence was deafening. But silence doesn't last forever. Caroline set her phone down, letting the endless stream of updates scroll by on their own. She had been in the public eye long enough to know how these things played out. A scandal erupts, outrage spreads, and before long, someone becomes the scapegoat. This time, that person was Melissa. And yet, as satisfying as it was to see accountability delivered, Caroline couldn't shake a nagging thought. How many times had this happened before, without cameras rolling? She had the platform, the influence, and the audience to fight back when she was unfairly treated. But what about the everyday travelers? The ones who didn't have millions of people watching. How many had been turned away for reasons that would never make the news? A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find an older woman, early 60s, standing there with a cautious smile. She was dressed simply, jeans, a sweater, a tote bag slung over one shoulder. "Ms. Levitt," she said warmly, "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I just wanted to say thank you." Caroline blinked. "For what?" The woman let out a small chuckle. "For standing up for yourself. For standing up for all of us." She shifted the tote bag on her shoulder. "I fly a lot, and I've seen things like this happen before, not as obvious as what happened to you, but enough to make you feel like you're not welcome, like you're being punished for thinking a certain way." Caroline studied her, seeing the genuine emotion behind her words. "I just want you to know," the woman continued, "people are watching, and we appreciate what you did." For the first time since stepping off that plane, Caroline felt a real sense of resolution. This wasn't just about her. It never had been. Melissa had tried to use her as an example, to send a message that people like her weren't welcome. But in the end, the message that actually got sent was a different one entirely. People weren't just going to sit back and let this kind of thing happen anymore. The woman gave her one last nod, then stepped back. "I won't take up any more of your time. Just wanted to say my piece." Caroline smiled. "I'm glad you did." The door closed and Caroline sat back down, her coffee now lukewarm. Her phone was still lighting up, but this time she wasn't interested in the noise. She already knew how this story ended, not with anger, not with gloating, but with a reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person standing their ground to remind the rest of the world to do the same. If you believe in fairness, in holding people accountable, and in standing up for what's right, share this story. Let people see what happens when bias goes unchecked, and why it's more important than ever to speak up when it does. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories that matter. Because the fight for fairness isn't just happening in headlines, it's happening in everyday moments, just like this one.